Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast chat, or I guess we'll call this a client lesson update. And probably going to do 2 of these this morning. Enjoy this while it lasts. I've made a bit less of these middle of this week so far because client work's picking up. And if the next couple months, if my coaching business grows as much as it did this month, I may be slowing videos down a hair because it's just going to be a matter of free time. But let's get over to the point. One of the biggest things that I run into repeatedly is lifters with long legs and their deadlift, particularly people who have desk jobs, and them rolling their pelvis forward. And what happens when they do that is that it completely rounds their lower back. And in person, this is easier to fix because if I can come over and manipulate someone and I can yell at them or do whatever I need to do to get them to stop doing it, it's actually much easier to fix in person. But when you're coaching online, it can take months to fix this. And that's just been my experience, because getting a person who has poor body awareness to be aware of why they're doing this is difficult, because you have to teach them how to hip hinge. And usually what this comes down to is that lifters with longer legs have to pull with higher hips, right? Someone who's 6'1" and has long legs, long femurs, they almost need to pull stiff leg. And the problem is that they've been watching guys deadlift who are shorter than them, and that they think that they're supposed to squat down. And the reality is they really have to just hip hinge and almost stiff leg deadlift it while keeping their back in extension. So invariably what happens with these people, particularly if they have a desk job and their hamstrings are tight, number one, they have tighter hamstrings. They don't have the best mobility in there yet, and it takes time to build that. This is where good mornings come in handy. It's the first tool. Romanian deadlifts can help, but I find that good morning is superior. And in some cases, you need to do both. And these lifters are resistant to do this. A lot of times when you tell them, hey, I want to take you to a Romanian deadlift or a sumo deadlift, as you do not know how to conventional until we get you used to hip hinging better, they're resistant. They're like, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to keep trying to fix it, but then they can't fix it. And I humor some of them sometimes. I have one right now who I'm about to take his conventional deadlifts away. I'm going to give him one more session. But he can't fix it because he's not setting up correctly. And if you can get them to get into a situation where they're hip hinging all the time, they'll naturally learn how to do it. Because basically, these lifters who are doing this need to almost learn to just do a Romanian deadlift from a dead stop. That's what they need to learn how to do. And what happens is that they don't know how to push their hips back. Because when we're dealing with a squat versus a hip hinge, it's a continuum. It's not an either or. Okay? And this is one of the things I always point out with the good morning versus the squat. What is a power good morning versus a power squat? What's the difference? The amount of knee bend. The hip movement's identical. So in other words, the more flexion that occurs of the knee, the more squatty a movement becomes. And the less flexion of the knee, the more of a hip hinge. And these are the same lifters who will try to round their back on a good morning if you let them. But you can teach them how to get into back extension and just hinge at the hip on a good morning, and it takes a while for it to carry over into their brain to it. Because one of the other things that I use to describe it is a dog pooping. And again, this gets people's attention. Like, why does a dog roll under like that when they poop? It's to point their butthole at the ground, basically, so that nothing hits anything else on the way down. Like, you need to point it at the wall behind you. You need to keep it there. The problem becomes they can do it when they get to a good morning, but then when they go over to deadlift, they don't do it. They still roll their back over and they squat down to the bar. And then when they try to fix it, they still just roll their lower back because they're not thinking to push the hips back. They're not pushing their hips back far enough. And then what do they do to try to get to the bar? They bend the knee. And as they bend the knee, if their hips are not pushed completely back already, to bend the knee, what happens? The pelvis goes with it. And they just roll it forward. And their whole lower back looks like a big old camel hump. And it comes down to them not being able to hip hinge correctly. Right? And what I try to teach these lifters to do, and again, you have to explain this through Messenger or through Skype, and to get them to understand, and it doesn't always register. And this is a hard part about coaching, and a lot of you out there may be doing this. It's a very common mistake, especially for people with longer femurs, is getting them to learn to set up correctly, to get them to basically stiff leg down to the bar. When they go to grab it, to not look down, but to keep their back in extension and to push their hips and butt way back and bend down to the bar on the setup when they go down to touch the bar. But the problem you have is that a lot of times, again, they've got longer legs and they're stiff-legged, and so because their hips aren't far enough back, they might look like they're in a good position, and then when they finally get to the bar, that last little bit, they either have to roll their back or they bend their knees. When instead of either rounding the back or the knees pushing forward, they need to get the hips back even further. And they might need to push them another 2 or 3 inches further back than what they're doing. And it's again so that they can get tight and stay tight and get into that position. But again, this comes down to a faulty mechanics and people practicing bad mechanics from day one. And the deadlift is really, really simple. In person, a good coach can teach someone of any body height to find their ideal position within 5 minutes. But when you're trying to teach yourself, or you're doing long distance coaching, this is one of the hardest things to teach for the longer leg lifter. Short leg lifter is really easy. And, it's easier sometimes when they have a home gym and you can set up a Skype and you can walk them through it. They can set their phone up and you can talk to them. But when they train at a commercial gym, you can't schedule that as easily, right? Scheduling a call to walk them through it while they can hear you with the phone pointed at them in a Skype session to where it's like, okay, here's phone's at me, talk to me, I can hear you, you're on loudspeaker, and you can walk them through the process. I basically tell them, no, hips back more, back. No, that's not enough. Another 3 inches back until they get into the position. But again, this is a problem that I see repeatedly. One of the most common problems I see with long femur lifters who have taught themselves how to deadlift when they conventionally is just continually rolling the pelvis forward and rolling their back because they're not going into a hip hinge. They're trying to get to the bar to squat it up. And really only the short leg guys can squat it up. Or again, people will see someone like Bjorn do it wearing a deadlift suit. Okay? They're wearing a deadlift suit, that's a different animal. And it just puts their back into an easy position to get hurt. And the deadlift is a safe exercise. They're just not willing to put themselves into the correct position because they have so much bad habit of doing it incorrectly. And especially if they have tighter hamstrings from a desk job and you haven't done much stretch reflex work yet. It's a bad habit that takes some time to unlearn. And even if you teach them correctly, which you have to watch for someone who's ingrained a bad habit, you can teach them and all of a sudden they have a perfect deadlift, right? It looks great. They get back on their own when you're not there watching again, and what happens? They will revert to that bad habit. So it takes practice. And at some point for a lot of these lifters, you have to take the conventional deadlift away from them until they learn to hip hinge. And when they can do that correctly and consistently and they don't get to practice the bad habit anymore, and you've ingrained a new movement pattern entirely with other lifts, then you can introduce the lift again. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.